Chernobog and Belobog, the Slavic gods of eternal war explained. From the heart of the ancient forests of Europe, where the whispers of the old world still cling to the mist-shrouded pines and the deep, dark soil, a myth of profound and terrible symmetry was born. It is a tale etched not in stone, but in the very soul of a people, a story of two titans locked in a conflict as old as time itself. This is the story of Chernobog and Belobog, the black god and the white god, whose eternal war shaped the cosmos and defined the very essence of existence for the Slavic peoples. Imagine, if you will, a world balanced on the edge of a knife. On one side stands Belobog, the radiant one, the white god. His beard is the color of freshly fallen snow. His robes are woven from the morning light, and his touch brings warmth, growth, and fortune. He is the architect of the day, the giver of good harvests, the patron of order, and the very embodiment of all that is just and merciful. Where he walks, life blossoms. He is hope made manifest. But for there to be light, there must be shadow. And in this world, the shadow has a name: Chernobog, the black god, a being of absolute darkness, a colossus of rage and despair whose form is carved from the starless void of a moonless midnight. He is the lord of all that is cold, barren, and unforgiving. His breath is the winter gale, his voice the rumbling of the avalanche, and his gaze the harbinger of famine, plague, and death. He rules over the chthonic realm of Nav, the underworld, and his power is one of entropy and decay. These were not merely gods of good and evil as we might understand them today. They were fundamental forces of the universe, locked in an inexorable cyclical struggle. For half the year, Belobog would reign supreme, and the world would flourish under the sun's benevolent warmth. But as the wheel of the year turned, Chernobog would rise from the underworld to seize control, cloaking the world in the frost and darkness of winter. Their war was the engine of the seasons, the rhythm of life and death, the cosmic dance of creation and destruction. This is the grand, epic narrative that has captivated the imagination for centuries. It is a story of perfect, terrifying duality. But as with all great myths that echo from the depths of time, the truth is a far more complex and elusive creature. What if I told you that this epic war, this perfect symmetry of a white god and a black god, may not be what it seems? What if one of these gods was a phantom, a ghost conjured centuries later? And what if the true beliefs of the ancient Slavs were something far more nuanced, and perhaps far more terrifying in their ambiguity? Join us as we delve into the shadows of history, sift through the chronicles of medieval priests, and deconstruct a myth that has shaped our understanding of an entire culture. This is the Eldritch Codex, and this is the story of Chernobog and Belobog, and the war that never was. Our investigation does not begin in a sun-dappled sacred grove, nor at the foot of a fearsome wooden idol. It begins in a place far removed from the raw, vibrant paganism of the ancient Slavs. We must travel to the mid-12th century, to the cold stone walls of a German monastery in the Duchy of Saxony. Here, in the quiet, disciplined world of a scriptorium, amidst the scent of aging parchment and drying ink, a man named Helmold of Bosaw undertakes a monumental task. By the flickering light of a tallow candle, he puts quill to vellum, chronicling a world he sees as teetering on the brink of salvation, a world being dragged from the darkness of superstition into the light of the one true faith. His work, the Chronica Slavorum, the Chronicle of the Slavs, will become one of the most important historical documents of its time. And within its pages, a single brief passage will give birth to a god of immense and terrible reputation. To understand the god, we must first understand the man who wrote him into history. Helmold was not an anthropologist. He was not a dispassionate ethnographer seeking to preserve a culture for posterity. He was a priest, a servant of God, and a product of his time. Born around the year 1120 in Lower Saxony, he was educated in Brunswick under the tutelage of Gerald, the future Bishop of Oldenburg. Gerald was a key figure in the Christianization of the lands east of the Elbe River, and he instilled in his young protégé a deep sense of mission. Helmold's purpose was not merely to record history, but to justify it, to create a narrative that framed the often brutal conquest of the Slavic tribes as a righteous and necessary act of divine will. His world was one of stark binaries. There was Christendom and there was heathendom. There was the singular benevolent Christian God. And there was the devil, a master of deceit who manifested in the countless false gods of the pagans. Every ritual he witnessed, every belief he heard of, was passed through this rigid theological filter. He was not looking for nuance. He was looking for evidence of demonic delusion. This worldview is not a footnote to our story. It is the very lens through which the image of Chernobog was first focused. The people Helmold wrote about were the Polabian Slavs, a collection of Western Slavic tribes, including the Wagri, the Rani, and the Obodrites, who inhabited the lands of modern-day northeastern Germany and Poland. By the 12th century, they were among the last holdouts of Slavic paganism in Central Europe. For centuries, they had fiercely resisted the eastward expansion of the German emperors and the encroaching influence of the Christian Church. Theirs was a culture of wooden forts known as gourds, of intricate social structures, and of a deep earth-centric spirituality. They worshipped their gods in sacred groves, carved their images into wooden pillars, and consulted their oracles before matters of war and peace. This was not a peaceful frontier. The era was defined by the Windisch Crusade, a series of violent campaigns from 1147 onwards, sanctioned by the Pope himself. German, Danish, and Polish nobles led armies into the Slavic lands with the dual purpose of seizing territory and forcibly converting the population. Sacred trees were felled, idols were smashed, and priests were killed. It was a time of immense cultural trauma and upheaval. Helmold, while occasionally expressing disapproval of the extreme violence and greed of the secular lords, fundamentally supported the Crusades' goal. His Chronica Slavorum was, in part, a report from this spiritual war zone, intended for a Christian audience, confirming their belief that the Slavs were a people lost in the darkness, desperately in need of conquest and conversion. It is with this crucial context in mind that we must approach the single fateful passage that concerns us. In Book 1, Chapter 52 of his Chronicle, Helmold describes a peculiar custom he observed or had heard about among the Slavs. Let us transport ourselves there, into the scene he paints. Imagine a longhouse, perhaps during the bleak midwinter or a raucous pre-battle feast. The air is thick with the smoke of a central fire pit, the smell of roasted meat, and the sweet heavy scent of mead or beer. Warriors, farmers, and elders are gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Laughter and boasts echo off the timber walls. At a certain point in the feasting and carousing, a communal vessel, a large drinking bowl, begins its journey around the circle. As each person takes the bowl, they do not merely drink. They speak. They utter words over the liquid, a strange formula of benediction and malediction. This is the moment Helmold captures. He writes, and I quote from a standard English translation, "The Slavs, too, have a strange delusion. At their feasts and carousals, they pass about a bowl over which they utter words, I should not say of consecration but of execration, in the name of the Godsoff, the Good One, as well as of the Bad One, professing that all propitious fortune is arranged by the good God, adverse by the bad God. Hence, also, in their language they call the bad god Diabol or Zernabach, that is, the black god." Let us pause here. This short paragraph is the single most important piece of evidence in our entire investigation. It is the bedrock upon which the entire legend of a Slavic dualistic war is built. We must treat it like an artifact at a historical crime scene, examining every word, every phrase, for its hidden meaning and its inherent bias. First, Helmold's opening statement. The Slavs, too, have a strange delusion. From the very first sentence, his judgment is clear. He is not describing a respectable religious practice. He is diagnosing a spiritual sickness, a delusion. His objectivity is abandoned before the description even begins. Next, he describes the ritual itself, They pass about a bowl over which they utter words, I should not say of consecration but of execration. This is a critical distinction. Consecration is an act of blessing, of making something holy, of offering something to a deity. Execration is the opposite. It is an act of cursing, of denouncing, of invoking evil upon something or warding it away. This suggests that the ritual was not one of worship directed at a bad god. It was more likely an apotropaic rydia ritual designed to avert evil. By passing the bowl and speaking a curse against the source of misfortune, they were collectively pushing back against the darkness, verbally inoculating themselves against bad luck. Then comes the most pivotal line. In the name of the Godsof the Good One, as well as of the Bad One, professing that all propitious fortune is arranged by the good God, adverse by the bad God. Here, Helmold establishes the dualistic framework. He observes a ritual that acknowledges both good fortune and bad fortune, and projects it onto two opposing divine entities. This is where his Christian worldview powerfully asserts itself. The idea of a single source of good and a single source of evil is fundamental to the Christian theology he knows. He sees what he expects to see, a pagan echo of his own god and devil. But notice the profound imbalance in his description. He tells us they acknowledge a good God, who arranges propitious fortune. But he gives this God no name. He offers no epithet, no description, no local equivalent. The supposed good God is a complete blank, an anonymous placeholder in Helmold's account. This is a deafening silence. If a supreme white god named Belobog was truly the counterpart to a black god, a figure of equal and opposite stature, it seems almost inconceivable that Helmold, or the sources he spoke to, would have failed to mention his name. In stark contrast, he immediately provides a name for the negative principle. Hence, also in their language, they call the bad god Diabol or Zernabak, that is, the black god. This sentence is a Rosetta Stone for understanding the process of interpretation at play. He gives us two names. The first is Diabol. This is not a Slavic word. It is a Latinized form of the Greek diabolos, the slanderer, the very name for the devil in the Christian tradition. Helmold is explicitly telling his reader, the being these pagans speak of is, in fact, the same entity we Christians call the devil. He is not translating. He is equating. The second name he provides is Zernabak, his Germanized phonetic spelling of a Slavic term. The word is a compound of Simachkiznak Arntvordiznak, meaning black, and Bogtvordiznak, meaning God. So, quite literally, black God. This seems straightforward, but it opens a profound debate that continues among scholars to this day. Was Chernobog the proper name of a specific, personified deity with a mythology and a distinct personality? Or was it simply an epithet, a descriptive title for misfortune itself? Think of it this way. In a moment of anger after a storm damages your home, you might curse the heavens and cry out, "The destroyer has struck again." You are not necessarily referring to a specific god named the destroyer. You are personifying the destructive force of the storm, giving a name to your misfortune to make it tangible, to make it something you can curse and rail against. It is entirely possible that the Slavs at that feast were doing something similar. Chernobog, the black god, may not have been a deity they worshipped, but a name they gave to the abstract concept of bad fate, of all the dark, negative things that can befall a person. Sickness, crop failure, defeat in battle, a bitter winter. The ritual of execration then was not devil worship. It was a communal act of defiance against fate, a way of saying, "We see you, darkness, and we curse you. Stay away from our homes and our families." Helmold, steeped in a theology of personal sentient evil, would not have recognized such a subtle distinction. He heard the name Black God, and his mind immediately made the connection. Black is the color of evil, the color of sin, the color of the devil. Therefore Zernabak is Diabol. A nuanced folk custom was thus flattened and simplified into a clear-cut case of demonic worship, making it all the more urgent that these people be brought under the Christian fold. So, after dissecting this single precious passage, what are we left with? We have a name, Chernobog. We have a location, the lands of the Polabian Slavs. We have a time, the mid-12th century. And we have a ritual. A feast where a bowl is passed, and curses are uttered against a black god to ward off misfortune. But what we don't have is just as important. We have no description of Chernobog's appearance. We have no mythology, no stories of his creation or his deeds. We have no evidence that he was offered sacrifices or that he had priests or temples dedicated to him. We have no mention of him in any other contemporary source. And most critically, we have no named opponent. The good god remains a nameless, faceless ghost in the chronicle. The idea of a cosmic war, of two great powers locked in eternal combat, is entirely absent. There is only a one-sided ritual of cursing the dark. Our search for Chernobog has led us to this single, flickering candle in the vast darkness of history. The chronicler's whisper has given us a name, but it is a name wrapped in prejudice and filtered through a hostile theology. The god we find here is not the titan of popular culture, not the winged demon of Bald Mountain. He is a murky, ambiguous figure, perhaps a god, perhaps just a name for bad luck, documented by an enemy who saw the devil in every shadow. The foundation is fragile. The evidence is sparse. And the most famous part of his story, his eternal war with his shining brother, has not even begun. For that we must look elsewhere. In our previous chapter we journeyed into the heart of the 12th century, to a spiritual war zone on the eastern frontiers of Christendom. There, in the ink of a German priest's chronicle, we found the first and only contemporary mention of a Slavic black god, Chernobog. Yet, he was a murky figure, seen through the distorting lens of a hostile theology, perhaps not a god at all but a name for misfortune, cursed in a ritual of defiance. But in the grand saga of a never-ending war, a conflict requires two combatants. Helmold's account left us with a profound and unsettling asymmetry. A named bad god, and a nameless, faceless good god. A battlefield with only one confirmed warrior. So we must ask the crucial question. If Chernobog's shining twin, his radiant adversary, was not present at the dawn of the myth, where did he come from? From what ancient grove or sacred text did he emerge? The answer is as shocking as it is fascinating. Belobog, the white god, was not unearthed by an archaeologist's spade. Nor was his name deciphered from a weathered runestone. He is a specter of historical reconstruction. He is what scholars call a pseudo-deity, a ghost god, conjured not from the soul of ancient Slavic belief, but from the intellectual ether of a much later age. This is the story of how a god was forged, not by a celestial smith, but by the cool, calculating fires of human logic. For 4 centuries following Helmold of Bosaw's death, the historical record is silent. Through the High and Late Middle Ages, as kingdoms rose and fell, as plagues swept the continent and universities were founded, no reliable source mentions a Slavic deity named Belobog, or anything resembling a white god. The very concept seems to vanish from the written word. This profound silence is not insignificant. It is powerful evidence in itself. If a deity of such paramount importance, the supreme god of goodness, light, and fortune, was a central pillar of Slavic paganism, his absence from every chronicle, every sermon, every legal document for 400 years is simply inexplicable. The stage for his creation was set much later, during the intellectual upheavals of the Renaissance and the subsequent Age of Enlightenment. This was a period when European thinkers began to look back at the pre-Christian past with a new kind of curiosity. They were driven by a desire to classify, to systematize, and to understand the world through rational principles. For these scholars, the fragmented and often contradictory accounts of paganism were like a challenging puzzle. And the human mind, particularly a mind trained in the traditions of Western philosophy and Christian theology, abhors a vacuum. It craves balance, order, and symmetry. It is here that the allure of dualism becomes an irresistible intellectual force. The Western tradition is saturated with binary oppositions. God versus Satan, heaven versus hell, spirit versus flesh, order versus chaos, light versus darkness. This framework is a powerful tool for making sense of a complicated world. When the scholars of the 16th century and beyond picked up Helmold's Chronica Slavorum and read his tantalizing passage, they saw an incomplete equation. They saw a bad god, Zernebach, and they saw a reference to an unnamed good god. The asymmetry was jarring. It felt illogical, unfinished. A black god in their minds demanded a white god in opposition, just as a shadow demands a source of light. The stage was not just set for Belobog's creation. His existence was becoming a philosophical necessity. The forging itself was an act of elegant, and perhaps fatally flawed linguistic inference. The process was likely simple. Scholars started with the one solid piece of data they had: Helmold's Zernebach. They correctly identified this as a Germanized spelling of a Slavic name. They broke it down into its constituent parts. The Proto-Slavic root Simevkiznak Arntvordiznak, meaning black, and the common Slavic word for a deity, Bogtvordiznak, or god. The result: black god. From there, the leap of logic was short and direct. If a black god exists and he is opposed by a good god, then that good god must surely be his polar opposite in name as well as function. What is the opposite of black? White. What is the Slavic word for white? The root is Beltvordiznak, leading to words like belly in Russian or bialy in Polish. The intellectual Smith simply took this root, combined it with the same divine suffix, and hammered out a new name. Belo plus Bog became Belobog, the white god. He was born, not from a myth whispered around a campfire, not from the prayer of a pagan priest, but in the quiet study of a scholar, as a solution to a logical puzzle. He was the answer to a question that the ancient Slavs may never have even thought to ask. Belobog was a hypothesis, a brilliant piece of mythological reverse engineering. The problem arose when this hypothesis, over time, began to be treated as a historical fact. Once the idea was seeded, it began to sprout in the works of later writers, who often blurred the line between reporting history and repeating the scholarly theories of their day. Around the year 1530, a writer named Sebastian Frank in his Weltbuch, and later the Dominican friar Johann Lindner, in a compilation of histories, mentioned the Slavic worship of both a black and a white god. However, modern historians view these works with extreme skepticism. They were often uncritical compilations of various sources, mixing reliable history with folklore, hearsay, and outright invention. They cannot be considered independent proof of an ancient cult. They are more likely the first written echoes of the burgeoning scholarly theory of dualism. A more specific, and therefore more tantalizing, account comes from the mid-16th century. Thomas Canso, a Pomeranian historian, wrote his Chronik von Pommern, Chronicle of Pomerania. Pomerania was a land that had once been home to Slavic tribes. In his work, Canso describes pagan practices and mentions that the Slavs would direct their curses toward a black god, but their blessings toward a white god, whom he names Bilebug. Bile is clearly derived from the Slavic root for white. He even claims that an idol of this Bilebug was once worshipped in the city of Gutsko. On the surface, this seems like the corroborating evidence we have been looking for. But again, we must be critical. Canso was writing 400 years after the Christianization of the region. Paganism as a living religion was long dead. Where was he getting his information? There are several possibilities, none of which confirm an authentic ancient cult of Belobog. First, Canso may simply have been influenced by the prevailing scholarly winds. He was a learned man. It is highly probable that he was aware of the academic theory of a white god being the logical opposite of Helmold's black god. He might have taken this theory and presented it as a concrete historical fact pertaining to his own region of Pomerania, perhaps to create a more complete and symmetrical pagan history for his homeland. Second, he may have been misinterpreting local folklore. It is possible that folk traditions about a benevolent white spirit or figure persisted in Pomerania, and Canso, armed with his knowledge of the scholarly dualism theory, elevated this local spirit to the status of a major god, giving it the learned name Bilebug. Third, the account could be a partial or complete fabrication, designed to create a more compelling and dramatic narrative. The past, especially a dark pagan past, was often a canvas upon which later writers painted their own ideas. Canso's Bilebug may be more of a literary character than a historical deity. Crucially, like the earlier sources, Canso's chronicle is not a contemporary account. It is a late reflection, and it appears to be a symptom of the Belobog theory taking root, rather than proof of the theory's ancient origins. Proponents of an authentic Belobog have also turned to the realm of folklore for evidence, pointing to a fascinating figure from Belarusian tradition, known as Balun. Balun is typically depicted as a benevolent, wise old man with the long white beard, dressed entirely in white. He appears on roads or in fields, but only during the daytime. To encounter Balun is a sign of great fortune. He can help travelers who have lost their way and bestow wealth and bountiful harvests upon peasants. The connection is tempting. An old, white-clad figure of goodness and fortune. Surely this must be the demoted folk memory of the great white god, Belobog, surviving for centuries in peasant superstition after the official pantheon was destroyed. This theory of demotion, where major gods become minor folk spirits, is a common pattern in the study of religion. However, the link between Balun and Belobog is highly speculative and fraught with problems. Folklore is a fluid and complex medium, and figures like Balun can have multiple origins. He could simply be a localized animistic spirit, the personification of a good harvest or sunny weather with no connection to a grand, overarching pan-Slavic deity. Furthermore, another powerful theory suggests that Balun is not a memory of a pagan god at all, but a folklorized echo of a Christian saint. The description of Belun, a kind, white-bearded old man who brings gifts and good fortune, bears a striking resemblance to Saint Nicholas. As Christianity spread, the characteristics of popular saints were often blended with local beliefs, creating new syncretic folk figures. Balun could easily be one such creation, a product of the interaction between Christian hagiography and Slavic folk tradition, rather than a pure pagan survival. To claim him as definitive proof of Belobog is to choose one tantalizing possibility while ignoring other, more plausible explanations. And so, our search for the white god ends not with a triumphant discovery, but with the deconstruction. We find no solid ground, only the shifting sands of inference, speculation, and late, unreliable testimony. Belobog appears not to be an authentic god of the ancient Slavs, but a product of the intellectual forge of post-medieval Europe. He was born of a thirst for symmetry, given a name through linguistic logic, and propped up by a handful of questionable later sources and tenuous folkloric connections. The grand epic war between Chernobog and Belobog, the central myth that has so powerfully defined the popular understanding of Slavic cosmology, appears to be an illusion. Its foundation is unstable, resting on one god who is sparsely documented and heavily misinterpreted, and another who is an intellectual invention designed to balance the scales. This revelation may seem destructive. It dismantles a powerful and aesthetically pleasing narrative, but in truth it is liberating. By clearing away the rubble of this false duality, we are no longer constrained by a simplistic framework of good versus evil. We are now free to ask a much deeper and more rewarding question. If the ancient Slavs did not see their world as a simple war between black and white, then how did they see it? What were the true forces, the true gods, and the true conflicts that shaped their cosmos? The answer to that question will lead us away from this philosophical battlefield and into the wild, complex, and genuinely authentic world of the true Slavic pantheon. In the ruins of a demolished myth, we find an opportunity. We have journeyed through the sparse words of a medieval chronicle and the speculative halls of Renaissance scholarship, only to find the grand dualistic war between a white god and a black god to be little more than a phantoma story born of misinterpretation and a thirst for symmetry. The chessboard of good versus evil lies shattered at our feet. But to sweep away a false narrative is not to leave a void. It is to clear the ground for a far more authentic and far more fascinating reality. By freeing ourselves from the simplistic confines of a black and white morality, we can now begin to explore the world as the pre-Christian Slavs might have truly seen it. This was not a world locked in a singular ethical struggle. It was a cosmos teeming with a multitude of gods, goddesses, and spirits, a vibrant, chaotic, and sacred ecosystem of overlapping powers and ambiguous moralities. This was a world governed not by a war, but by a dance, a complex and eternal rhythm of conflict and cooperation, of life and death, of creation and decay, all woven into a single breathing whole. To understand this world, we must first abandon our modern notions of good and evil. These concepts, as absolute personified forces, are largely an inheritance of Abrahamic monotheistic thought. The ancient Slavic worldview, like many polytheistic systems, was far more pragmatic and nature-centric. A god was not good or evil. A god was powerful. Their actions could be beneficial or detrimental depending on the situation, the season, and the respect shown to them by mortals. The storm that brought life-giving rain to a farmer's parched fields was a blessing. The same storm that flooded his village and destroyed his home was a curse. The deity behind the storm was not judged morally for this. It was simply expressing its fundamental nature. The Slavic cosmos was a place of immense power, and survival depended not on choosing a side, but on understanding and navigating the delicate balance between all its competing forces. If there was a central defining conflict in the Slavic pantheon, a struggle with far more evidence in folklore, linguistic roots, and comparative mythology than the tale of Chernobog and Belobojit, was the epic and cyclical struggle between the god of the high sky and the god of the wet underworld. This was the cosmic duel between Purin and Veles. Let us first meet the combatants. High above, ruling from the top of the world tree, the mighty oak, dwells Purin. He is the god of thunder and lightning, the celestial governor, the divine enforcer of heavenly law. His voice is the rolling thunder that shakes the mountains, and his weapon is the lightning bolt, often imagined as a thrown axe or stone arrow that splits trees and strikes the earth with fiery righteousness. He is a god of the sky, of fire, of war, and of martial order. His beard is of copper, his chariot is drawn by goats or horses, and he is the patron of princes and warriors, of the Druzina or warrior retinue. He represents the high, dry, sunlit world, the visible realm of human society and cosmic principle. He is power, order, and heavenly fire made manifest. But the world is not only the sky. Beneath the roots of the world tree, in the dark, damp, and fertile earth, lies the domain of his great rival, Veles. Veles is a far more enigmatic and multifaceted deity. He is the god of the underworld, which the Slavs called Nav, not a place of punishment like the Christian hell, but a watery, grassy realm where the souls of the dead grazed alongside celestial cattle. Because of this, Veles is the lord of waters, of the forests, of the wild, and crucially, of livestock. In a pastoral society, cattle were the very measure of wealth, so Veles was a god of prosperity, abundance, and earthly riches. But his power went deeper. He was a master of magic, a a sorcerer god, the keeper of arcane wisdom, and the patron of poets and musicians, whose inspiration was seen as a form of divine communion. And he was a shapeshifter, most famously taking the form of a great serpent or a dragon, coiling in the darkness below. He represents the chthonic, the wet, the chaotic, and the magical aspects of existence. He is not evil. He is the necessary counterweight to Purin's celestial order, the god of the untamed wilderness, versus the god of the structured heavens. The myth of their conflict is a primordial storm myth, a story told to explain the very workings of nature. The narrative begins with an act of transgression. Veles, in his serpentine form, slithers up from his underworld realm of Nav, climbing the great world tree into the domain of Purin. There he commits a great theft. Depending on the version of the myth, he steals Purin's divine cattle, his son, or even his wife. The cattle are the most common and symbolically potent object of the theft, representing the heavenly waters and fertility, locked away in the clouds. Enraged by this violation of cosmic order, Purin, the god of the granite fist, roars into action. He mounts his fiery chariot and pursues the great serpent Veles across the face of the earth. The chase is the storm itself. The rumbling of Purin's chariot wheels is the thunder. As Veles flees, transforming and hiding behind rocks, in trees, or plunging into rivers, Purin hurls his lightning bolts to strike at him. This is why, according to Slavic folklore, it is dangerous to stand under a tall oak tree during a thunderstorm, for it is Purin's sacred tree and the place he is most likely to strike in his battle. Finally, Purin corners his foe. With a final cataclysmic bolt of lightning, he strikes Veles down. The great serpent is defeated, slain, and sent back to his underworld domain. But this is not the end of the story. This is not a victory of good over evil. This is the climax of a necessary cosmic process. Veles's death is a ritual death, and in his fall the stolen wealth is released. The heavenly cattle, the clouds, are freed, and they pour down upon the earth in the form of life-giving rain. The fire of the sky god has fructified the domain of the earth god. The conflict between the two great deities has resulted in the irrigation and fertilization of the world. This cycle was perpetual. After his defeat, Veles would eventually recover in the underworld and, in time, ascend the world tree once more to steal the heavenly cattle, beginning the dramatic chase all over again. Their conflict was the engine that drove the seasons, the eternal drama that ensured the land would never remain parched. The world needed both of them. It needed the high, ordering fire of Purin, and it needed the low, chaotic waters of Veles. Their war was not a struggle for moral supremacy, but the sacred generative tension that holds the universe together. This dynamic interplay extends throughout the entire Slavic pantheon, which was populated by figures of immense power and complex character, none of whom can be painted in simple black or white. Presiding over the earth that received the heavenly rain was the great goddess Mokosh, whose name is linked to the Slavic word for moist. She was the moist Mother Earth, a powerful and widely worshipped deity of fertility, prosperity, and female destiny. She was the protector of women, childbirth, and domestic arts like spinning and weaving. In this latter role, she was often seen as a weaver of fate, much like the Norns of Norse mythology, spinning the threads of life for mortals and gods alike. Mokosh was a crucial mediating figure, standing between the celestial realm of Purin and the chthonic realm of Veles. She received the fertilizing rain from above and the sacred moisture from the springs and rivers below, transforming them into the bounty of the harvest. She was revered, respected, and central to the well-being of the community. In the celestial sphere we find Sverag, the divine smith, a creator god akin to the Greek Hephaestus. Sverag was believed to have forged the sun itself, placing it in the sky to give light and warmth to the world. He was a god of fire, not the wild, destructive fire of Purin's lightning, but the creative, transformative fire of the forge. He represents craftsmanship, invention, and the ordering of the cosmos through divine labor. His son, known either as Svarashik or, more commonly, Dazbog, was the personification of the sun itself. Dazbog's name translates to the giving god, and he was seen as a benevolent source of life, light, and wealth, who traveled across the sky in his chariot each day. But even this giving god had a dangerous aspect. The same sun that ripened the crops could also bring scorching drought and famine if the balance of the cosmos was disturbed. And then there were the figures who embodied the darker, more feared aspects of existence. The most prominent of these was Morana, or Marzana, the goddess of winter, plague, and death. She was the cold breath of winter that froze the rivers and covered the earth in a shroud of snow. She was the bringer of the diseases that culled the weak, and the embodiment of the inevitable decay that awaited all living things. She was, by any measure, a terrifying and destructive force. And yet, Morana was not evil in the way a demon is evil. She was a necessary part of the cosmic cycle. Her reign during the winter was essential for the earth to rest and regenerate. Her power was absolute, but it was not eternal. The culmination of her story came in the early spring, during a festival where Slavic communities would create an effigy of her, a straw figure dressed in woman's clothing. This effigy would then be paraded out of the village, and in a great communal ritual, it would be ceremonially drowned in a river or burned on a pyre. This was not an act of fighting evil. It was a ritual of magical transition. By ritually killing Morana, they were actively ending the season of winter and welcoming the return of spring and life. Her death was a cause for celebration, because it was an integral part of the cycle that ensured the world's rebirth. She had to die for life to triumph, and she would inevitably be reborn when the wheel of the year turned back to winter. Beyond these major deities, the Slavic world was fundamentally animistic. The entire world was alive, imbued with spirit and consciousness. Every forest, river, field, and home had its own guardian spirit, a being that had to be acknowledged and appeased. There was the Leshy, the capricious master of the forest, who could lead travelers astray or protect the animals within his domain. There was the Vodyanoi, the malevolent water spirit who lurked in rivers and lakes, ready to drown the unwary. In every home there was a domovoi, a household spirit, often living behind the stove, who protected the family and its livestock if he was well fed and respected. If angered, he could cause mischief and misfortune. These countless spirits were the everyday face of the supernatural. They were neither angels nor demons. They were forces of nature and place, immoral and deeply tied to the land itself. This, then, was the true Slavic cosmos. It was not a sterile black and white chessboard. It was a wild, tangled forest, full of life and death, growth and decay, light and shadow, all existing in a state of dynamic, sacred tension. It was a world animated by the clash of thunder and the underworld, a world blessed by the moisture of the Earth Mother and the fire of the Sun God, a world that had to endure the death of winter to celebrate the rebirth of spring. The never-ending war was not one of good versus evil. It was the eternal generative conflict of the natural world itself, the sacred dance that kept the cosmos in motion. This was the complex and profound worldview that was lost, or deliberately obscured, when chroniclers tried to force it into the simple, alien mold of a black god versus a white god. We have journeyed back to the authentic heart of the Slavic cosmos, a world teeming with the multitude of powers, where the central conflict was not a simple war of good versus evil, but the sacred cyclical dance of nature itself, embodied by gods like Purin and Veles. We have seen that the stark dualism of Chernobog and Belobog, the black god and the white god, is largely a historical illusion, a ghost forged in the mind of a Christian chronicler and given form by the logic of later scholars. By all rights, this should have been the end of the story. A scholarly footnote, a curious case of mistaken identity in the annals of mythology. But myths are not governed by the rules of historical accuracy. They are living things, powerful ideas, and the story of the two warring gods was an idea simply too potent to die. While its historical basis may have been a phantom, the narrative itself possessed a strange and powerful life of its own. It lay dormant in obscure texts for centuries, but in the modern era, it did not just re-emerge. It exploded. It was resurrected, reimagined, and broadcast across the globe, taking on a new and terrifying reality in the fertile landscape of popular culture. This is the story of how the black god and the white god became more real, more influential, and more widely known in the 20th and 21st centuries than they ever were in the ancient world. This is the story of a war that, having never been fought, began to be waged on our screens, in our books, and in our games. Our story begins not with a ritual, but with an intellectual movement. The 19th century saw the rise of romantic nationalism across Europe. For the Slavic peoples, many of whom lived under the rule of foreign empires like Austria-Hungary or the Ottomans, this was a time to forge a distinct cultural identity. They looked to their past, to their folklore, and most importantly, to their pre-Christian mythology, searching for epic sagas that could rival the grand mythologies of the Greeks, Romans, and Norse. In this search, the fragmented polytheistic reality of figures like Purin and Veles was often seen as too complex, too messy. The dualistic war between a supreme god of light and a supreme god of darkness, however, was perfect. It was grand, it was epic, and it was easy to understand. Slavic poets and artists began to embrace this narrative, solidifying the idea of Chernobog and Belobog as central pillars of their ancient heritage, regardless of the thin historical evidence. The myth was becoming a truth through sheer cultural will. But it would take a master of modern myth-making to transform Chernobog from a regional curiosity into a global icon of terror. And that master was Walt Disney. The year is 1940. The film is Fantasia, Walt Disney's audacious experiment in blending classical music with breathtaking animation. The film's climactic sequence is set to Modest Mussorgsky's terrifying tone poem, Night on Bald Mountain. As the music begins, we are transported to a jagged, menacing peak. But this is no ordinary mountain. At its summit, the rock itself seems to stir. Two colossal, leathery wings unfurl, revealing a being of unimaginable scale and malice. The very mountain peak is his body. This is, as the film's program notes explicitly state, Chernobog. This is not the ambiguous black god of Helmold's chronicle. This is evil incarnate. Disney's Chernobog is a titan of pure, unadulterated malevolence. His form is a masterful fusion of Slavic name and Western demonic iconography. He has the horns of Satan, the wings of a bat, and a physique of monstrous power. With a wicked grin, he summons forth the souls of the damned. Ghosts, harpies, and demons rise from a haunted village and a graveyard below, swirling towards him in a terrifying spectral vortex. He takes them in his massive hands, transforming them in hellish fire, casting them down into the volcanic heart of the mountain, laughing with sadistic glee. He presides over a Walpurgisnacht, a witch's Sabbath of pure chaos and terror, a celebration of evil for its own sake. His reign of terror only ends with the coming of the dawn and the tolling of the Angelus bell, which forces him to fold his wings and recede back into the mountain, a creature of darkness vanquished by the faintest glimmer of sacred light. The impact of this 7-minute sequence cannot be overstated. For millions of people across the world, this was their first and only introduction to a Slavic deity. And what an introduction it was! Fantasia divorced Chernobog from any historical or cultural nuance. It did not care about the Polabian Slavs or 12th century rituals. It took a name and used it to create a universal archetype of the devil himself. Walt Disney reportedly told his animators that they were animating Satan. And they succeeded. This depiction seared Chernobog into the global consciousness, not as a god of bad luck, but as a cosmic entity of supreme evil, a being on par with any devil or demon from any religion in the world. He was no longer a myth to be studied. He was a nightmare made real. This single act of popular culture did more to define Chernobog's modern identity than any historical text ever could. For decades, the Disney version remained the dominant image. But in 2001, the myth was resurrected and given profound new depth by another master mythmaker, the British author Neil Gaiman, in his seminal novel American Gods. Gaiman's Chernobog is a world away from the silent, elemental demon of Fantasia. We meet him in a grimy, dilapidated apartment in Chicago. He is an old, hulking man with a thick Slavic accent, stained teeth, and a perpetually grim demeanor. He is a retired slaughterhouse worker, a god whose power was once tied to the poleaxe that stunned cattle before the kill. He is weary, cynical, and deeply bitter about his diminished status in a modern America that no longer has room for old gods of darkness and blood. Gaiman does something brilliant. He takes the scholarly, reconstructed myth and treats it as gospel within his fictional world. He explicitly codifies the never-ending war as a family affair. This Chernobog speaks of his brother, Belobog, the white god. He tells the novel's protagonist, "There were two of us. Two brothers. He was the white one. I was the black one. He got the sun, I got the shadows. He was the light on the hills. I was the darkness in the forests." He explains that his brother Belobog went west, changed his name, and faded away into the light, while he, Chernobog, remained, forever bound to the darkness. In Gaiman's hands, the myth becomes a powerful metaphor for the immigrant experience and the clash between old ways and new. Chernobog is a god of a specific kind of darkness, not abstract evil, but the grim, necessary darkness of death that makes life possible, symbolized by the slaughterhouse. He is a god of the bloody hammer of endings of the cold winter. His deal with the protagonisto joined the coming war in exchange for being allowed to smash the hero's brains in, with a hammer at sunrise, both terrifying and deeply characteristic of his nature. The subsequent television adaptation, with Peter Stormare's magnetic and menacing performance, brought this complex, world-weary, and utterly dangerous version of the god to an even wider audience. American Gods accomplished two things. First, it reintroduced the name Belobog into the popular narrative, solidifying the idea of the warring brothers as a core tenet of the myth. Second, it gave Chernobog a personality and a philosophy. He was no longer just a monster. He was a character, a fallen king nursing his grievances, a tangible piece of a dark and bloody past stubbornly refusing to die in the bright, sterile present. If Disney gave the myth its iconic image and Gaiman gave it its literary soul, it was the world of video games that turned the never-ending war into an interactive reality. In the digital realm, players don't just watch the conflict, they participate in it. In the popular MOBA or multiplayer online battle arena, Smite, whose very premise is a battleground of the gods, Chernobog was introduced as a playable character. His design is a direct descendant of the Fantasia archetype, a winged horned demon of the night. His title is the Lord of Darkness. His abilities revolve around shadows, deception, and inflicting suffering. Players can select him and literally wage war against other gods from the Egyptian, Greek, and Norse pantheons. The game mechanics turn mythology into a competitive sport, and in this arena, Chernobog is a top-tier dealer of death and darkness. In the massively popular Japanese role-playing game series Persona, which heavily features the summoning of mythological entities, Chernobog appears as a high-level demon, or persona, that the player can harness. He is depicted as a monstrous, shadowy figure, often associated with curses and dark magic. Here he becomes a tool, a source of dark power to be wielded by the player against their enemies, reinforcing his association with forbidden, malevolent forces. Perhaps most fascinatingly, in the grand strategy series Crusader Kings, which allows players to guide a medieval dynasty through centuries of history, the pre-reformed Slavic faith has a unique feature. Rulers can choose to join a secretive society, a cult that is, for all intents and purposes, a stand-in for a satanic sect. The object of their worship? Chernobog. Joining this society allows players to engage in dark rituals, assassinations, and black magic to further their political ambitions. Here, the myth is fully integrated into a historical simulation, explicitly framing Chernobog as the focus of an evil, clandestine faith, the antithesis of the good pagan gods and the Christian Church. Across these and many other games, a consistent image emerges. Chernobog is almost universally portrayed as a god of evil, darkness, and immense power. His war, whether literal or symbolic, becomes a gameplay mechanic, a source of conflict that drives the narrative and empowers the player. The digital world has become the new sacred grove where Chernobog is worshipped, feared, and unleashed. And so we arrive at a profound and fascinating paradox. A mythological narrative with the flimsiest of historical foundations has become one of the most successful and enduring stories to emerge from the Slavic world. The Chernobog we know today, the winged demon, the weary slaughterman, the digital lord of darkness, is a modern god. He is a syncretic being, a tulpa willed into existence by the collective imagination of the 20th and 21st centuries. He is part 12th century curse, part 19th century nationalism, part Disney nightmare, and part video game power fantasy. The never-ending war between Chernobog and Belobog is real. It is not, however, a war that was ever fought in the primeval forests of ancient Europe. It is a war being waged right now in the landscape of popular culture. It is a war of ideas, a testament to the fact that myths are not static relics to be unearthed and catalogued. They are alive. They adapt, they evolve, and they are constantly being reshaped to reflect our own cultural anxieties, our values, and our deepest, most primal archetypes. We are drawn to the story of the warring gods because it is simple, powerful, and deeply resonant. It speaks to our own experience of a world filled with light and shadow, hope and despair, creation and destruction. The story of Chernobog and Belobog in its modern form is a story we tell ourselves about ourselves. It is a modern myth that uses the names of the past to explain the conflicts of the present. And it proves once and for all that the most powerful gods are not always the ones with the deepest history, but the ones with the best stories. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of the past and the light of the present. If you wish to continue exploring the forgotten truths and cosmic secrets hidden within the world's great myths, be sure to subscribe to the Eldritch Codex and ring the bell for notifications. Until next time, look closely at the stories you've been told. The truth is often far more fascinating than the legend. Conclusion. A war of ideas. Our journey through the ages has brought us full circle. We began on a mythological battlefield of cosmic proportions, with the epic tale of Chernobog and Belobog, the black god and the white god, locked in an eternal struggle that defined existence. It is a powerful, primal, and profoundly satisfying story. A perfect, terrible symmetry. Yet, as we have ventured through the dusty corridors of history and into the vibrant chaos of the modern imagination, we have discovered that the foundations of this epic are built not on the solid rock of ancient belief, but on the shifting sands of interpretation, reconstruction, and reinvention. We have sifted through the ink of the past and found Chernobog, not as a dark lord of a pagan pantheon, but as a whisper in a 12th century chronicle. He was a black god named in a ritual of execration, a curse against misfortune, a figure immediately and perhaps irrevocably misinterpreted through the dualistic lens of a Christian priest who saw the devil in every unfamiliar shadow. He was a character in a report from a spiritual war zone, his true nature shrouded in the fog of a hostile interpretation. In our search for his adversary, we found only a void. We discovered that his shining twin, Belobog, the white god, is a ghost, a phantom of reconstruction born centuries after the pagan fires had died. He was forged in the cool, logical minds of scholars who, faced with an incomplete equation, created him out of a desire for symmetry. Born of linguistic inference and philosophical assumption, the white god is a testament to our own need for balance, a deity willed into existence to satisfy a narrative structure that may have been entirely alien to the people it was meant to describe. By clearing away this spectral battlefield, we uncovered a far more authentic and complex reality. We found that the true spiritual world of the pre-Christian Slavs was not a simple two-sided coin of good and evil. It was a rich, chaotic, and contradictory tapestry of polytheistic and animistic belief. Their cosmos was animated by the dynamic, and often violent, interplay of natural forces. We witnessed the true cosmic conflict in the storm myth of Purin, the thunderous god of the heavens, and Veles, the chthonic serpent of the watery underworld. Theirs was not a war of morality, but a necessary generative cycle of nature that brought fertility to the world. Their pantheon was filled with figures of ambiguous power, from the nurturing earth mother Mokosh to the feared, yet necessary winter goddess Morana, whose ritual death heralded the rebirth of spring. It was a world of shades of gray, not of absolute black and white. And yet, in a paradox that lies at the very heart of our story, the myth of the warring gods refused to die. We saw how this historically fragile narrative was resurrected with immense power in the modern era. It was transformed by the demonic majesty of Disney's Chernabog in Fantasia, an animated titan who defined pure evil for generations. It was given a weary literary soul in Neil Gaiman's American Gods, where the fraternal war became a poignant metaphor for old ways dying in a new world. And it was made interactive and visceral in the digital realms of video games, where players could wield the power of the Lord of Darkness, making the ancient war a present-day reality. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with the profound realization: the never-ending war between Chernabog and Belobog is not a historical fact, but it is, nonetheless, a profound truth. It is not a war that was fought between ancient Slavic deities in the primeval forests of Europe. It is a war of ideas, and it is being fought on two fronts. The first front is the eternal clash between historical evidence and compelling narrative. History is often messy, fragmented, and ambiguous. A story, on the other hand, craves clarity, structure, and emotional resonance. The tale of a black god versus a white god, though historically weak, is a far more powerful and easily digestible story than the complex realities of Slavic polytheism. And in the battle for the human imagination, the better story often wins, regardless of the facts. The second, and more important, front is the war within ourselves. The myth endures because it reflects the most fundamental dualism of the human condition. We live in a world of day and night, of summer and winter, of joy and sorrow, of life and death. The story of Chernabog and Belobog provides a perfect mythological canvas onto which we can project our own understanding of this struggle. We see in their conflict a reflection of the battles we face in our own lives and in our societies. The story of Chernabog and Belobog is, therefore, ultimately a story about ourselves. It is a mirror showing our enduring quest to make sense of the darkness and the light, and to find our own place within that grand, eternal struggle. The myth, in its modern form, may tell us very little about the beliefs of the ancient Slavs, but it tells us a great deal about the mind of modern humanity. It reveals our need for order, our attraction to epic conflict, and our timeless belief that even in the deepest darkness, there must be a corresponding light. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of the past and the startling light of the present. If you wish to continue exploring the forgotten truths and cosmic secrets hidden within the world's great myths, be sure to subscribe to the Eldritch Codex and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss an expedition into the unknown. Until next time, look closely at the stories you've been told. The truth is often far more fascinating than the legend.